This is Ron Peters.
I'm Sam Long.
And I'm John Nugent.
Welcome to the After Class Podcast.
Because the best conversations happen
After class.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of the After Class Podcast. We're glad to have you along. We thought we'd start this one. So the last episode, John talked about a great story about his about the church getting together and painting a shed and getting Subway. And when I heard Subway, I'm like, ugh. So, so I thought it'd be an interesting question to say, hey, what is your favorite sub place? And so around here we have Jersey Giant, Jersey Mike's, Firehouse, Subway. I think there might be other smaller places. Those are the big chain ones that you might stop at. So what's your favorite sub? And maybe if you want to throw in, what do you get there?
So for me, there's no question it's Jersey Giant. Not that other ones are bad or anything like that, but when I think of Jersey Giant, this is me going back into the late 80s.
Oh, yeah.
So this is a long time ago. But I worked at a place where there was a Jersey Giant right across the road. And I didn't have a lot of money back then. And so every payday, this is the only day I would do it, every payday, I would go to Jersey Giant and I would get the Jersey Giant. I can't remember which number it is, but I get the Jersey Giant and I would always get it loaded down with banana peppers. And because I would watch them make it and they'd sprinkle peppers on, I'd say, more peppers, please. They put a little bit more on, I'm like, more peppers, please. I just wanted a ton of them. So a Jersey Giant with banana peppers piled on, a little bit of oil vinegar, and a Mountain Dew. And that was my go-to lunch every payday. And I did that for probably 2 years. And so I don't get there very often anymore. But if I go into a Jersey Giant, I don't get Mountain Dew anymore because I don't drink pop anymore. But I definitely would get that sub, hands down. I just think it's great. And again, other sub shops do a fine job. It's not that I think they're bad, but there's something about that that's always just going to be, it's always going to have this nostalgia spot for me. And so, yeah, Jersey Giant would be my choice.
All right. So this is a loaded question.
Aren't they all?
I protest the language.
Oh, wow. Protest.
He doth protest too much.
So in New York where I grew up, we do not call sandwiches subs.
Fair enough.
That's not language. We call them heroes.
Sure. Okay, sure.
And other places they call them hoagies. I don't know, where is that geographically? I've never been in a place that did that. Do you know where that happens?
I don't know where that's from.
I know the term, but yeah, I can't delineate it.
So my favorite hero store is the Handy Pantry. And it is like have you been to a Handy Pantry?
I've never heard of the Handy Pantry.
Okay. It's like a multi-purpose little grocery store.
Ace Hardware.
And they used to get bread from the Rocky Point Bakery, which had the best bread in the town where I grew up. They would import that every morning freshly made. And when they lay meat on a sandwich, it is like 2 inches, maybe 2.5 inches thick. And the sandwich bread is just, they're known, and Rocky Point sandwich places in general are known for their excess. Like they add, even though you get a bacon, a BLT or a bacon cheese egg sandwich, like they're loading on the bacon, like is thick. And they're loading on the eggs. So anyway, the Handy Pantry sandwich, every time we go to New York, we get a sandwich from Handy Pantry. Although Rocky Point Bakery has shut down, and so the bread level kind of went down a tick. Yeah. And so that's my favorite place, but no one here could relate to that. So if you want to know locally in the Midwest, it's Penn Station. Penn Station is a different kind of sandwich than the Handy Pantry, but I love their bread. And they use real boar's head meat products, and that's what Handy Pantry did. So it reminds me of that taste, right? That thick. They don't layer on the meat the way
they do not.
It does, but I love their Italian sub toasted on white bread.
You had us go to a Penn Station one time, and I think it might have been
on the way to SCJ.
Yeah, that was an SCJ trip.
It was like a Penn Station attached to a gas station.
Right.
Yeah. And they're not all equal. I thought that place was actually halfway decent. The one near us, it just depends who's working, whether it's a good sandwich or not. So they're not consistent in the way that a Subway or maybe a Jersey Giant would be.
See, that's where automation would make everything consistent. People, not everybody does it the same way. So once you automate it, it's always the same every single time. No differences.
But there's nothing automated about how Handy Pantry does it. Everyone just knows when you make a sandwich, you load on the meat. you always use the best meat ingredients and the best cheeses. So it's the most expensive cheese with the most expensive meat. You're going to pay a lot for it, and it's going to be a delight.
And you're so happy that you paid that much extra for it. Yeah, I
Absolutely.
understand that.
Money well spent.
Okay. I'm a big Jersey Giant fan. The bread is fantastic. I also feel like they layer on the meat pretty well. Not
Yeah.
probably to the extent that you're talking about, but they're not messing around normally. Occasionally you get a person who's new and doesn't get it, but like, yeah, they so like if it's a sub, I'm going Jersey Giant. I'm getting the Beastie. It's got roast beef and ham and turkey. It's great. But I also like at Firehouse, they have the New York Steamer, which is corned beef and pastrami and hot.
I don't think I've had that.
I don't know what you're doing with your life, John, but this
Where is Firehouse?
it's right down the street by the cleaners on the corner of people are like what on the corner of Saginaw and Kreitz.
Down by Barry
Weird. There's a Subway right there
Dimitri's.
too, right?
Yep.
Right next to each other. That's nice.
Is the Subway still there?
Oh, they may have closed that
I
Subway
wonder if
down.
the Subway is now the Firehouse. Maybe that's what happened.
We'll have to try that.
Anyway, but yeah, I love subs, and from most places, I don't. Not Subway. Their ingredients are just too crappy for me. I don't go there anymore.
Yeah.
It's just it feels like I look at the meat and I'm like that looks gross. And so yes, quality of meat it matters to me. And so like at Jersey Giant when they're cutting the roast beef and it's still red, I'm happy. You know?
Yeah, because they've got the meat cutter right
they're
there,
doing it right
and
in
they're
front of your
running it
face.
through the
Oh, it's
cutter,
so great.
and you can see them doing it. And that's what I love because most places will do this. You can watch the whole process. It's not in a back room where you're like, "What the heck are they doing?"
How
back
long
there?
has this meat been out?
Yeah. But you see them pulling it out of the cooler and cutting it, and you watch the whole process. It's not the only mark of quality, but it's a key part of quality.
It helps.
Yeah, Subway is the lowest form.
It's bad.
It is. I'm happy to eat it because I like all the ingredients. So I don't mind our church having it to save a little money.
Sure.
Invest our money in other things. But yeah, it's no, it's the worst form of sandwich. I do like Jersey Giant for the reasons you guys do. There's just something in the bread. I want a bread with something not great.
Oh,
I like the amount of meat. The bread
like
just
the bread.
needs to have like more of a harder, not a hard shell, but a harder shell. Like it's just too mushy bread. I like a little hardness to it.
And you see, I'm just not a bread person. Other people are. I understand that that's fine. I'm not finding fault. To me, bread is just a transport medium. You know, it's just how you get the good stuff to your mouth. It's like when I eat pizza, you know, my wife is all about the crust and stuff like that. I'm like, crust is just how you get the good stuff to, your mouth. And so it's not that I'm indifferent to bread, but when I hear people talk about quality bread, I'm like, I wish I could think like that. Because like with Jersey Giant, it's kind of like you said, that crusty on the outside. And it is good quality. I'm not denying that it's good quality, but it is all about the meat, and the cheese, and the peppers and all that.
Yeah. So,
all right. Something
we obviously love.
Yeah, without a doubt. And each for our own reasons.
Trying to segue.
I know. It's brutal. So last episode, we talked a lot about love, and we didn't quite get through the passage we read.
That's right.
So we're going to pick up there of chapter 2 of 1 Peter. We just finished talking about how we love one another in a sense of more than mutual affection, but actual familial priority. And he continues in chapter 2, verse 1, "Rid yourselves, therefore, of all malice and all guile, insincerity, envy, and all slander. Like newborn infants, long for pure spiritual milk, so that by it you may grow into salvation, if indeed you have tasted that the Lord is good." I think the logic between the therefore is, so if you want to actually, show love to each other, you should probably not be mean to each other, like have malice and guile and, insincerity and all those sorts of things. And that makes sense. So if you're in a community where you're trying to actually show true biblical love to each other, if those things are present, then love is not. It pushes love out. If you're busy slandering people, how is that loving them? And so for Peter, it's just a natural, like, you almost wonder, like, does he know something about this, the people he's writing to? Like, I've heard, not like Peter or Paul, I've heard of these, like, he doesn't say that, but perhaps there's a undertones of treating each other poorly, which goes right against the love edict in 22.
Yeah. Well, I think that this is, last time we talked about it, how the love that we should have for each other should be so conspicuous to the world that they can just see it in action. And this is what makes me sad, playing off a little bit of what you said there, Sam, is that I think that there are churches where malicious talk, insincerity, guile, these kinds of things. People know that these things take place in the church. And that is a church who is just not living out God's kingdom in a way that makes it look inviting to the world. And so I think that Peter's able to go this direction because he knows this is the opposite of what love looks like. It makes me think of things, like in Galatians 5, talking about works of the flesh and things of that nature. That's that same idea that when you're in the flesh, this is the kind of stuff that's going to define you, and people are going to see it. And so the church really, really needs to model something different. Number one, because that's how God looks. God is not malicious or full of guile or insincerity or things like that. He doesn't slander people. That's just not how God operates. And if we have embraced God's vision, then we should be God imitators. So yeah, all these things just show us that if this is the kind of stuff going on, you have not been transformed by the message of the gospel and by God's Spirit.
Agree.
So I got a question, and I'm a process guy. I like steps and stages and so forth. And so earlier it's like, you've come to trust in God. You have your hope and trust in God. He says, now that you have purified your souls/lives, and there's obedience, then how come we still have these things in our lives? Like, why does he have to tell them to? If all that has happened, you're purified, then why do we still have to rid these things from our lives? How does that all work, right? The process of what does it look like to be a Christian, so to speak, to live out this purification, this new birth, right? How does that all work? Because it seems like on the one hand he says you're there, and then he says you're not there. And so I think that's a tension I think we see in a lot of Christians and a lot of people outside the church who you call yourself a Christian, but you're still doing bad things. So how does that work?
I think part of it is that it is a process, that there is a tension, and tension's just a part of life, that we have embraced the gospel message, but it's a slow process of becoming, of conforming to it. I think what happens is that once we embrace the gospel message, that gives us a framework in which to have this conversation. So let's say you're in the church and you've got a believer. This brother or sister is absolutely committed to Jesus. That's not in question. But this person is being malicious in the way that he or she is speaking. Within the church, you can have a conversation and say, that's not very Jesus-like. That's not very gospel-like. That's not very kingdom-like. And so I think that what happens, and we've all been guilty of it, is that sometimes we slip into the flesh. And so the kingdom gives us a framework within which to have a conversation to say, I sympathize, your emotions or whatever. I understand what you're going through, but that's not a kingdom way of approaching this. And hopefully, especially if it comes out in an emotional moment when we cool down, we can go, you're right, it isn't. And creates an opportunity for us to go back to somebody and say, you know what, I spoke maliciously and I shouldn't have. And even reconciliation can come out of that to say, well, it shouldn't have happened in the first place, but the kingdom gave us a process by which we can be reconciled to each other. So I think you see it kind of through that larger lens. This goes back to what you said previous episode, John, about seeing everything through the lens of the gospel. We're going to make mistakes. That's why the Bible gives us provisions for what to do when those things happen.
Yeah, I don't see a multi-step process here. I see it more like they've been reborn. They've accepted Jesus. They've believed. They've accepted the truth. They have cut off their allegiance to the world, right? They are now exiles, been engrafted into God's kingdom mission, and so their conversion has happened. And now that you've converted, it's time to become a real team player in the kingdom mission, which means you have to start loving one another. I don't think that's happened yet in the process. He has to tell them to love one another mutually with this deep affection, right? To start prioritizing one another. And if you're going to do that, you have to rid yourself of all the selfish things of, so it's like they have maybe step one in the process is they've cut off their loyalty to the old life of the world, and they've pledged their allegiance to God. Now you have to start prioritizing the kingdom community and getting rid of all the stuff that maybe you're used to of how you related to people in your old life. You need to relate to one another in a totally new way, and this other stuff has to stop. So maybe a two-step process. The positive of love has to go hand in hand with the negative of eliminating the envy, all the things in the world that cause people not to love each other.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's the problem. It's so easy for, I think, the world to look at Christians who aren't living Christianly and say, you're just like us. And they could be young Christians who are not there yet, or they could be old Christians who never embrace this second step. Like they're happy to take the first step. The second step is maybe a step too far. And yet that's part of it. That's what it means to actually follow Christ. And so I don't know. I think we need to, I don't know, encourage that or stress that more in our churches. Like, we've got to get past step two. You're a bunch of babies sitting around the church. That's not my language; it's Peter's language.
Yeah,
yeah, right.
A bunch of babies sitting around, and like, we've got to grow up past this. And that's why Hebrews says, like, what are we doing here? Why are we fighting over these things? We should be well past this by now. Instead, you're still looking for that milk, and we should be looking for a nice juicy steak. And so the language of you long for spiritual milk so that you grow into salvation, and that's a nice, I don't know, I think that's like a nice, for me, a nice picture of what it's like.
Yeah.
You grow into salvation in the same way you grow into your personality and your body as you get older and older. Like, we weren't these people when we were 3.
Yep.
Thankfully.
But
my parents could have handled that sass at that age.
no, I think you're right, because the Bible loves to use that language, maturity. Israel had to go through a time of maturing. At one point they were like little kid nation, and their behavior was like little kid nation in terms of their commitment to God and His vision. But they matured. They grew up, and it took centuries, but it happened. And I think the Bible just sees it as a useful metaphor for so many different things that we go through, that we are born anew. We're born from above, which means we kind of start out as Christian little kids, and we have to grow into becoming mature believers. And that's why, like in the New Testament, it says, don't make new believers to be leaders. They're not ready for it yet. They haven't matured into the kind of person you want serving as a leader in the church. And so maturity is a process, and that's why we have to be patient and to be gentle with people, to say, yeah, you're a young Christian. I'm going to give you that place. But to your point, Sam, sometimes when people have been Christians for a long time, it's like, come on, grow up. You should know better by now.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that keeps us from loving one another on the ground the way we should is the way we've come to accept how Christians talk about other Christians, like in social media, right? Like on social media, I just had I read another post this morning with a respected Christian man who basically weighed in on something political and said to everyone else, and if you think differently about this, then just unfriend me now, or I'm going to unfriend you. Like in our public persona online, it's okay for people to not love fellow believers. Like, you have a different vision of what would be best for America. And because of that, I hate you.
Right.
It's not that I'm going to burn your house down. I just want to cancel you from my life and my world. That is the definition of hate, right? It's stronger than how the Bible talks about, where you're prioritizing someone else. But when believers are prioritizing people who share a common vision of what's good for America over loving fellow believers, both in your congregation and beyond your congregation, then the world just sees in us the same antagonisms it experiences between them and their family members of different political persuasions, or their neighbors of political, or their coworkers of different political persuasions. I see, and so And sometimes it doesn't translate, like you just hate people online, but in person you're nice to the people in your church family. But it often goes further than that, because if there are people in your church family who are on the other side and you've been public about being against the other side online, and they are reading the way you are to other people online, then they feel that hate.
Mm-hmm.
And then it creeps into the body of Christ. So I think, the Christian nationalisms on the left and the right are devastating to Christian love. And it's so public that it's so damaging to our witness. And I think that's a baby issue. They're not in this process. They've gone backwards. I think because a lot of people, like when they came to Christ, they actually did love one another. And then our world got so divided and polarized over the last decade that they have stepped back into the polarization of the world. And now, having stepped back into the polarization that typifies the world, they're now bringing that into the church. And now church is in a really bad spot right now.
That seems like a great title for a book, The Regression of American Christianity. Because I think you're exactly right. Because I think if you were to look at their life, like, what happened to that Christian, that person who was kind and generous in the sense of like offering grace and mercy? What happened to them? Why are you this bitter, embittered, awful person now? That's not reflecting who Christ calls us to be.
Yeah, because they joined another team.
Yeah.
And this other team that they've joined talks like this and acts like this, and they've become like that. And so now they're serving two masters.
Yeah.
And they're going to hate the one and love the other, and it's the body of Christ that suffers the most.
Yeah, and it's the temptation of that is so strong because it gets you popularity, it gets you the thumbs up or the likes or whatever, you want. And you begin to feel like you're important, you have influence in the celebrity and all those kinds of things, which are all worldly concerns. It's like you said, you're serving the master of celebrity and importance and influence. And then what was the cost? What have you given up? What's the value if you gain the world but lose your soul? And we've seen Christians who have fallen into that. And to me, it's the danger of celebrity and becoming an influencer, that you suddenly have to start playing to your audience. And it's so simple, but it's so powerful. The only audience I really want to play to is Jesus. I just want to play to him and for him to give me the thumbs up and the likes and all that, which is what the Bible says. And so if we keep playing to Jesus and I just want to do what you want me to do, then hopefully it's going to lead us away from malice and guile and insincerity and envy and slander, all the kinds of things that, like you said, Christian nationalists on the left and right end up falling into, because it gets some popularity, and nothing makes a show better than a bunch of guys disagreeing with each other and calling each other names, which is why we have refused to descend into that kind of podcast.
Yeah. And it not only hurts the church and corrupts this witness and compromises our love, it also falls short of Peter's vision of how we should relate to unbelievers. Like it's not just wrong because we're being that way to unbelievers online, and not just because we're doing that to believers online, but we're also doing it to the unbelievers whose life revolves around their political allegiance.
Yeah.
And Peter's going to advocate for a different way to treat all people, and then an even higher calling for the family of God. But the nationalisms on the left and right, they have a worldly view of all people and the family of believers, and maybe it even compromises their fear of God. The fact that their allegiance to what they think is best for the nation is trumping God's calling on their life as a believer means they might fear for the state of the country more than they fear for the state of the church, which is disordered fear.
Totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what Peter does here is he contrasts all that with the taste of milk, which is the taste is that the Lord is good. Can I get a vocab check on that? Christos?
Sorry, I'm trying to look down here in my text here. So,
Or Christos?
Yeah, Christos.
So, I mean, I guess my lexicon says good/kind, because that's kind of, those are a little bit different nuances. Kind makes sense in the context of like, kind seems to be opposite of slander, envy, malice, and so forth. Whereas good is just for me a quality of like goodness, which they could work, but for me, I think Peter's clearly contrasting these things, that God's character, which is one of goodness / kindness, is what we should seek after, which then sort of helps us grow up out of these other stupid things.
Yeah. I could do a quick
You
look
don't
up
have to.
on
It's
that.
not
I was
that
going to
big.
say
It's not
off
that
the
big
top
deal.
of my
If you
head.
don't have it, you don't have it.
Yeah, I don't have it.
It's no problem. It's fine.
Yeah, like I said, I don't have much I can comment on that without
No
actually
problem.
pulling up my lexicon to verify some
No
of that
worries.
stuff. But I think that
The contrast is there regardless.
If you say the Lord is good and you claim to fear him and have an allegiance to him, then you will be kind and good to one another.
Yeah.
And the fact that you're not, you should see as a contradiction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yep.
I think that's the point.
Yep. All right.
next section.
Finally.
I know it's like it took us forever. I think what happens is we keep getting bogged down in fantastic conversations, but
Which is okay.
it does slow down the process here. What we're going to go to? What did we say we're going to go
4
to?
through 10.
Okay, that's what I thought, but for some reason I was having a mental hiccup. So chapter 2, verse 4, come to him, a living stone, though rejected by mortals, yet chosen and precious in God's sight. And like living stones, let yourselves be built into a spiritual house, to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. For it stands in Scripture, see, I am laying in Zion a stone, a cornerstone, chosen and precious, and whoever believes in him will not be put to shame. To you then who believe, he is precious. But for those who do not believe, the stone that the builders rejected has become the very head of the corner, and a stone that makes them stumble, and a rock that makes them fall. They stumble because they disobey the word, as they were destined to do. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's own people, in order that you may proclaim the mighty acts of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy.
Boom.
Yeah.
What I love about that passage is how Old Testament it is. Like he's taking all these various really important statements about Israel and saying to the church, this is who we are. Like this is one of those passages that really, really says God hasn't changed anything up. That what God has begun in Israel, we are just now becoming a part of. We are joining into that process. And to say to Gentiles, we're going to call you the same things that God called Israel, I think that is really, really cool. And so it's like I just love this passage about how Israelite we are as the followers of Jesus, as Gentile Christians.
And it underscores this corporate vision of the Christian life, right? Like, if you're coming to Christ, then you're being built into a spiritual house, a holy priesthood, later on a royal priesthood, a holy nation, right? Get into Exodus 19. Like, this is what the Israelites were called. It's like the first description God gave to them after he delivered them from Egypt. Yeah. And like they have this purpose and a mission that they would be built into this community. And that community would be God's means of drawing all people to himself. And so he's still in the part of his letter where the first thing we have to get right is to get right with one another. To realize that our being made right with God, our salvation that we're growing into, is our incorporation into God's kingdom mission. And our incorporation to God's kingdom mission means becoming an integral part of the kingdom community, which is a holy community of mutual love for one another that exists to proclaim the excellence of God. And so this holy priesthood, this chosen people, it's the thing into which they were called, and it's a super corporate identity, and they have to stop thinking as individuals who are pursuing the Pax Romana and start seeing themselves as people who have been grafted into God's chosen people that has a distinct mission in the world.
Yeah, the communal aspect of this passage is unmistakable. He doesn't say you're built into a holy priest, right? You're a chosen person. right? It's all based on the community, because that's how it worked. Is together we form these things. You're not being built a one stone house. That makes no sense. And so yeah, he's really pushing. This is great logic in this letter. How he kind of goes through, and yes, it starts individual, but then now that individuality is brought into a community, and that community has a purpose, and the purpose is to continue what was the task of the Israelites, to be this chosen people, that you can proclaim these things, that you can proclaim the excellence of what God has done in their lives. And so this is just a great little passage. Like I said, lots of Old Testament-y things, a lot of quotations, the imagery of stones and things. I got a whole sermon about that, about I think what he's doing here, and it's just really well done.
Yeah. Well, and it makes me think, very much temple. He doesn't use the word temple here. He is, building it into a house. But at the same time, God's like, when he told Israel first to build the tabernacle, it's like, make me a place to live, build something where I can dwell among my people. And it even lines with what Paul, when he says, don't you know that, you all, plural, are the temple of the Holy Spirit. It's this whole idea of us together corporately being built into the place where God makes his dwelling. That's a radical idea. Back then, the gods had temples dedicated to them, and among the Greeks and Romans, they were hoping that the god would somehow inhabit the idol, and you could experience this moment with the god. And Israel had a house for God. They built first tabernacle and temple, but now it's like, no, God has poured out his Spirit upon all of us, and we are corporately his dwelling place. God has a house, and we are it. And each of us is this living stone that's a part of that structure. And I love it. It's such a beautiful image for us. It's also a challenging image, because if God makes his dwelling among us, are we a good dwelling? It's God looking down and saying, yeah, I'd like to show up, but that's not the kind of house I want to go to. Not saying it won't show up, but let's get things in order before I show up there. It's both beautiful, but it's also a challenge to us.
Yeah. And we can't miss that a big emphasis of several of these quotes from the Old Testament is that, and Christ is the cornerstone.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's the foundation of this house. And him being the foundation means that the gospel that revolves around him is the center of the house's life, that the teachings that he taught us in the New Testament, in the Gospels that we find, are the teachings that pave the way for behavior in this house. And so any kind of discipleship plan or vision of Christianity that sets aside the example and teachings of Jesus as relevant for the church today, or really mandatory for Christians today, is rejecting the very cornerstone that unbelievers who will die in their sin were destined to do. So I threw that destined language in there because that raises an interesting question. But Sam, I wanted your perspective, because you're a tabernacle guy and a sacrificial system expert. What do you think he's talking about with this offering spiritual sacrifices?
Well, I was thinking you were going to go a different direction, so I got to retrain my brain to what your question is going to be. So on the one, let me. This is going to get too long probably, but let me back up to the whole idea of living stones, first of all, for me.
Yep.
Yes, it's definitely in a sort of building a temple idea, but in the Old Testament, in the ancient world, stones were built for like memorializing things that happened, or to say, I have encountered God here. So in Hebrew, it's matzeva, or in plural matzevot. And so they would stand up these huge pillars and say, God was here, or something like that. But those are not that's not a living stone. That's it's a dead. Is there such thing as a dead stone? A stone is just a stone, right? It never had life to be, and so
it's not a soul.
So, right, or nefesh for that matter. And so you have the Israelites who would pile stones together, like when they crossed the Jordan to enter the Promised Land. They'd make this thing. So people come and they look at these, say, "What happened here?" Like, "Oh, let me tell you." Well, stones can't do that. Except now Peter's bringing forward this idea of like, well, you are that thing now, where people encounter you and you're able to say, I've had this encounter with God and I'm here to tell the tale. And all of us together are coming as living stones being built up into this place where we can proclaim as one people what God has done in our midst. So let's
Yeah.
start with that.
Yeah, and I love that imagery because, I mean, people are going to run into the church.
Mm-hmm.
And when they run into the church, just like when Israelites ran into that altar, that pile of rocks, it tells a story. And we are the ones who, when the world runs into us, first of all, they run into us and say, there's something significant going on here. And because living stones, we can testify, we can be a witness, and we are testifying to what Christ has done. We're testifying to the good news.
Right.
They run into us, they hear the gospel. They hear how Jesus changed the course of world history and inaugurated God's kingdom. And so I love that image, and I think it is kind of a richer one than, we're the building, but we're a bunch of cinder blocks that are making up a temple structure.
Sure.
I think that's richer.
Thanks. Me too. So if that's the case, right, where we're coming together and building a spiritual house, because not a physical house, where we are living stones, then what does it mean to make spiritual sacrifices? And so no longer are the blood of bulls and goats part of it, to use Hebrew type language, but now our sacrifices are such where, and I think it expands the idea of sacrifices. It's not just for atonement. Sacrifices are done for lots of different reasons. And so in the same way, as we're being built together, we're living this life together. Maybe we've done something against one of our brothers or sisters. We make a sacrifice, and that we figure out how to make that right. We have a blessing from God. We have a celebration. Right? That's an Old Testament-y idea, but we bring it now. We're doing it together as Christians, being built in the spiritual house. And so I think this is one way of getting at a little bit what he's talking about is we're offering these sacrifices that are parallel to the Old Testament sacrifices, but they're not done at an altar, at a temple. They're being done with each other as we're going through this life together.
Yeah. Amen. Ron,
Sorry,
You're looking-
Ron's researching.
he is
Yeah.
researching something.
yeah,
Were you listening to Sam at all?
no.
What's
I
new?
wasn't.
What's new? It's
No,
fine.
normally I would listen, but I was like, there was something in my head, and I'm still trying to track it down.
I know.
Sam, I checked
You
out,
do have a
so
one-track mind. I understand. That's
Yeah.
fine. That's
I
the way I
don't
do it.
deny it. It's,
Yeah, and
But-
it's probably in continuity with the previous chapter of learning to love one another,
right.
and that's costly. To lay down your life for one another, and to put others before yourself, and to display radically prioritizing the kingdom community, when you'd be tempted to prioritize your biological family, your own happiness, your vision for what would make this world better or this country better. Like, you are sacrificing the things you would ordinarily prioritize because now you seek first the kingdom. And in your love, your time, energy, and resources, you're prioritizing the kingdom community. And in doing so, you become something the world runs into, a stone, except you can speak and testify. Why is it that you prioritize this Jesus project and this Jesus community when in the world we think the most important thing is who the next president is going to be, or how the Supreme Court is stacked, or the different houses of the government, and the different laws that will be used to regulate, the governments of this world that are passing away. Right? It costs you something when you prioritize a different loyalty.
Mm-hmm. And that's why I think this particular chapter in this section is so rich, because it brings together all these ideas of what does it mean to actually be a Christian, to then be part of a community, to then actually be a light to the world. And that's such a great passage, and it could be explored quite extensively. But it's all built on Jesus, right? Like you said before, like you can't miss the fact that he makes it clear using like 3 different Old Testament passages to make it clear. By the way, it's got to be Jesus or it doesn't work. And that's a whole other demographic that needs to hear that message.
So priest language is used twice.
Okay. Yes.
What does it bring that this priest language is now applied to the church?
Purpose, calling, the sorts of things where and expanding to the entire group as opposed to just a group. Now, at that time, it was also the entire Israelite community. Like Exodus 19 is to all of them.
yeah. I was
You are a
just thinking
kingdom
that,
priest
yeah.
and holy nation. But then it kind of got, I would not say usurped, but there's a focus on there's a group who does it among them. And I think when that happens, some of the Israelites lost a bit of their identity. But now he's reminding us, like, no, it's all of us. And so we're building this house, like all these images are like layered on each other. We're building this house where we're actually also working in this house. And so it's not just, again, it's the community. It's not just one person doing something. It's all of us together. And so, like, Peter can't stress that enough. It's all of us together. No one is set aside for special usage. We're all doing special things.
Yeah. Well, and it makes me think of how, like, once you get to the guidelines for, like, the Levites and then for the priests, they do live a different life. You do a lot of the same things everybody else does, but then in some ways you don't. You don't get to be like everybody else. You have this wonderful privilege, but that privilege means that you're going to look differently. And there are going to be guidelines and regulations for the life that you live. And in a way, Israel should have looked at that and said, if we're a priestly nation, we're going to be different. We're just, we don't get to do what everybody else does because we have this high calling, which is a wonderful calling, but it means we're going to have to say those kinds of things are not a part of our life. And so to be a priestly nation is to accept we have certain responsibilities. Those responsibilities bring certain restrictions as well. Not because we don't get to do fun things, but we realize that those restrictions are actually part of the problem. Those restrictions are keeping us away from the very things that God is trying to correct in this world. And so as a priestly nation, Israel just has to know you're going to be different. And for us as Christians, we should embrace that and go, oh, I guess we're not going to be just like everybody else, that we are going to be different than the rest of the world. And that's part of the response we have to the calling that Jesus has placed on our lives.
Yeah, I think, this notion of, especially building on the Exodus 19, that Israel as a nation would be called a priestly nation. I think that presupposes, Genesis 11. Like, the world is filled with nations, and they're part of this system of checks and balances God has established in the world, where after Babel, he diversifies languages, which results in different cultures, which results in a world that has different people groups that have different borders, right? And they're alongside all the other nations. And the conviction of Israel is that God uses these nations, these different people groups with their own language and customs and cultures, to keep evil in check and at bay throughout the world, right? He uses governing authorities. We run into this in Paul's language, like the governing authority is God's servant. He uses the governing authorities to keep evil in check in the world, to keep order in society, because the world is filled with violence and evil and selfish intent. And if we just leave people unchecked to live however they want, this world is not going to be a place where anyone can thrive. And so God uses the nations to maintain order, and he uses the sword in the hands of the different nations to keep away other nations from just trampling across their borders and taking their people for their own. Like, there's this function the nations have. And the nations had that function in Moses' time, in the Israelites' time. And when he says, I'm calling you out, first of all, he called Abraham out from Babylon, say, I'm building a separate people out of you. Then later on, he has a bunch of kids who have kids who have kids who have kids, and then they become enslaved in Egypt, and then they come out of Egypt. It's like, all right, I'm separating you from one of the big empires again to be a priestly nation. Like, all the nations have a function in the world, and God uses it, and it's good that he does that. It's God's good order that a world is full of a plurality of nations that are checks and balances. But God's people are not just another one of those nations that he uses to guard a territory, to protect boundaries, so that evil is in check in the world. They instead are a priestly nation set apart with a different function than the other nations have. And it's to offer spiritual sacrifices. It's to be a holy, set-apart people. The other nations are set apart from one another by boundaries, right? The Israelites are set apart by their way of life that they received in Torah. Okay? And that their way of life is set apart because its job is not simply to hold the other nations in check. Their job is so that in the world there would be at least a nation who is living life according to God's original purposes and design. They are set apart. And I liked your first answer was they have a different purpose, right? To be a set-apart community that looks like God's kingdom, to use Christian terms, right, New Testament terms. That, to use Old Testament terms, would be a light to the nations, would show them a different way, that people would stream to them because their way of life is so superior because they're in touch with the God who is the superior God. So if that's the case, all of that's a big argument to say, like, we have a distinct, set-apart mission from all the nations of the world. And that is our calling. And it requires us to love one another, to prioritize one another, to throw off the envies and rivalries of the world, which is one of the biggest reasons why Christians ought not, if you have this priestly calling with Jesus as the cornerstone, his kingdom as the thing you seek first, then the last thing that should happen is that you should be divided amongst yourselves because you have a different vision for what the other nations of the world should be doing and how they should be doing it. Like Christians who get into Christian nationalism on the left or right, are they're helping the nations do what the nations were meant to do. And to do that, they are forsaking their priestly calling to be a nation that's been set apart from that project for the kingdom project, which is what only the kingdom community can do. So the priestly calling, it means you are set apart. You have a different function. You have a different mission. Christ is the cornerstone. You forsake that to start becoming the handmaiden of the nations of the world. Then you have forsaken your priestly calling. Mm-hmm. Is that too strong?
Not for me.
Oh, not for me. I love that. I think that's fantastic. I really do.
Yeah, or what's up?
I'm just looking at the time.
Yeah, and I think that's the challenge, and but the preview. That's why when you get to 11, here in a second we'll get to next time. That's why he calls us certain names, not bad names, but names that challenge us to view ourselves in that way. Because if you view yourself as part of the nations or a nation that is not the kingdom of God, you're not going to be able to do what you just talked about. You're going to have this split allegiance and split affinity, and it doesn't work that way. So
yeah, and it's killing the church's witness. It's fundamental unfaithfulness, and it is accepted as good American citizenry. It is accepted wrongly as how to be a good witness in America today. And it could not be further from Peter's vision in this book or God's vision all throughout the scriptures. It's a heresy that needs to be called out, and it needs to be excised from the church. Amen. And Forster's Press has a pretty cool book on this called Priestly Presence.
In case you've never heard of it.
All about the church's priestly mission.
Amen.
I may or may not have written it. Since you guys wouldn't call attention to it, I had to.
That's fair.
You put us out there.
It's valid.
We didn't take the bait.
Screwed up.
Well, I think we've gone as far as we can this week. Thanks so much for joining us in this episode of the After Class podcast. After class because
the best conversations happen
after class.
Thank you again for listening to this episode of the After Class podcast. ACP is hosted by Sam Long, John Nugent, and Ron Peters. Social media pictures and descriptions are provided by Darren Harris. Audio mixing and editing is done by Drew Nyquist. If you've enjoyed this episode of ACP, you might also enjoy GLCC's Master of Arts in Practical Theology degree. In this 36-hour program, you will receive first-rate biblical and theological instruction from John, Ron, Sam, and several of their colleagues at Great Lakes Christian College. To learn more about this program, visit glcc.edu. Get practical and go deep at GLCC.